Okay, welcome to our second Progressed Moon class, Masterclass for all you masters. So today is November 13th, 2017, and today we're going to first do a little review of what we did last time, and I'll ask a few of you to share what you came up with about your Progressed Moon by sign and house, for those of you who did your homework. And then I'm going to give you the Astro Techno tour of how to get your progressed moon chart from astro.com, and also how to get your progressed new moon chart from astro.com, for those of you who don't know how to do that. And then we'll get into the progressed lunar cycles, and I sent out a handout, posted in the Facebook group, and also sent a link to the handout in the email that I sent an hour ago, but I'll send out the handout. I'll send a link to that again. Okay, so let's start with a little review, and I expect more people will still be joining us. So last week, we talked about the progressed moon by sign and house. We mentioned the aspects a little bit. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a second. But basically, like, where are you at, right? Progressed moons, sign and house are going to really point to where are you at for this period of time. What are you hungry for? What kinds of people, what kinds of experiences are you drawn to? What are you in the mood for? The moon is your mood. So does anyone want to share, anyone who did the worksheet at the end of the handout, does anyone want to share what you came up with in terms of your reflections on your progressed moon? And I'll just have a couple people share. Anyone want to chime in? Okay, do I have to go first? Or Crystal wants to go? I think, is that your sign of like, yeah, I could go? Am I reading your body language correctly?
You are, in fact, not surprisingly, really.
Not surprisingly. Because Crystal and I are time twins. Our birthdays are very close. Okay.
Yeah. And I just finished the homework just now, so it's very fresh in my mind.
Awesome. Perfect.
You know, one of those last minute things. But yeah, so my progressed moon is in Virgo. And I think it went into Virgo sometime, just using the 1 degree a month kind of approximation, sometime around May of 2016 of last year. And it'll be in Virgo until December of next year. And that's Virgo rules my 4th house. So it looks like it also crossed my IC, I write that down, like in August of 2016. And will be in my 4th house until July of 2019. Okay. So I was like, well, I'm pretty comfortable myself in Virgo because it's my sun sign and rules my 4th house, and it's all. But obviously, I was hungry for a move, and I did move to Washington. So, and that's interesting. Right around May of 2016 was when my friend Brita and I started talking about buying property together, or figuring out a way to do this whole farm property together. So it's been the whole genesis of that. Also, just about to go conjunct, the moon is just, my progressed moon is just about to conjunct my south node. So that'll be, I can feel it building. I have these, as you know, my south node, north node challenges of work. So I'm trying to release and surrender and go to the Pisces North Node, and I feel it getting more and more intense. Definitely.
Intense in what way? Like, what are you noticing?
Harder to resist the overwork. You know, doing everything myself, and they're not doing it right, so I'm just gonna take it over and do it myself. Dang it. And then I'm working 18 hours a day, and I'm not sleeping, and I've got my fingers in everybody's work and making sure everybody's doing everything they're supposed to, and the master scheduler, you know, that thing, and not just letting it go with the flow and let it show up however it needs to show up and feel it. Yeah. So I have that whole struggle that's constantly going on inside myself. Like, it's time to let go. Can I let go? That kind of thing.
So like an intensification of South Node themes with your
yeah.
progressive moon moving into conjunction with South Node.
Yeah, trying to stay out of that negative pull of Virgo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be staying out of the judgment, trying to stay out of the criticism and focus on perfection. It's got to be done my way and that kind of thing. So it's been a real fun experience and interesting. And I noticed, well, of course, the dispositor, am I saying that right? Is Mercury, which is my chart ruler, Gemini rising. So, and Mercury is in my natal Mercury is in my 5th house in Libra. So the themes of collaboration and cooperation and partnership and grace and social skills, they're all definitely up since I moved onto a property with my best friend and we have to collaborate on everything. And yeah.
Right.
It's perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, and I would just add, as a sister, Mercury in Libra, as ruler of my Virgo conundrum, that I would think that maybe in terms of the South Node themes being activated, maybe also some Libran type, people pleasing, or right, as part of the overwork, like I have to do it all and get it all right, because otherwise people won't like me, or I'll let them down, or they'll think, blah, blah, blah. Part of
Definitely, absolutely, totally. That's like my whole life anyway. So certainly seeing a lot of that come up, not standing up for myself necessarily, and just trying to keep the peace by doing too much work.
Right.
Yeah, more than I feel like I should. So then I feel all martyred, like, well, you did this to yourself. So one thing I was curious about is my natal moon is in Sagittarius, and I was just starting to think about, so am I comfortable with that whole topic of, is your progressed moon comfortable in that sign relating to your natal moon, and my natal moon being all fiery and just whatever, ruled by Jupiter, but I haven't really come up with much other than I always feel comfortable in Virgo. So I feel like, well, but does my moon feel comfortable in Virgo?
Right. And I would say there's maybe some tension there, because you do have so much in Virgo with the Sun and the South Node there.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a part of you that's really comfortable in Virgo, but then that Sag moon that really wants the freedom, right?
Yeah.
Sag moon doesn't want to be working 18-hour days and on a computer or taking care of other people or being a people pleaser. That Sag moon wants to be wild and free, and so might be feeling a little constricted during this phase.
And things aren't moving fast enough. Yeah, totally. That's definitely true. Yep.
Cool. Well, what a great opportunity to release the old patterns with the progressive moon going over the South Node.
Yep.
Have them hit you over the head and
hit by the proverbial 2x4 in order to to notice it. It's really hard not to notice it at this time. So yeah.
Cool. Yep. Well, thank you for chiming in, Crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I want to mention, I know Elizabeth has her hand up. Elizabeth, I'll unmute you in just a sec. I just want to mention, since my progressive moon is about to go into Pisces, and I mentioned last time that my progressive moon is now at 29 degrees Aquarius, and there's some others here with 29 degrees, although Christine just left the 29-degree club and is now at 0. But to say that when the progressive moon is at 29 degrees, we do start to feel into the next sign. And so I recently started reading this book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And I'm like obsessed with it. It is totally rocking my world, and it's like a life changer. And I'm like, well, isn't it about time I learned how to surrender with my progressive moon about to go into Pisces? So highly recommend to I was like, I need to buy this for all of my Pisces North Node friends. They should all get The Surrender Experiment. But it's also great for the Virgo stellium, and I think it's great for maybe the whole Pluto and Virgo generation. Anyway, so noticing that when the progressive moon is about to change signs, we can also really already be feeling into the next sign. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I'm really grateful for the nudge to reflect more on my progressed moon, since I'm teaching this class, which is that, I talked last time about the progressed moon being in Aquarius and how literal that shift was from Capricorn to Aquarius. But my progressed moon also just a couple months ago moved from my 9th house to my 10th house. So first I was reflecting on, in terms of the 9th house and the progressed moon being in Aquarius there, just how much spiritual community I've created or become a part of over the past couple of years through these different retreats I've been doing. And then I was reflecting with the Astro Geek group. We were talking about Saturn and Sagittarius and how Saturn's about to leave Sagittarius. We were reflecting on that. And I was talking about all these amazing teachers, or a handful of really amazing teachers I've started working with over the past couple of years, and thinking about that in terms of Saturn and Sag, but realizing, oh, that's also been my progressed moon in the 9th house, the house that has a natural affinity with Sag, the house of teachers and teaching. So I was like, oh, okay, so Saturn's been in Sag and my progressed moon's been in the 9th house. So no wonder it's been such a strong period for me around teachers and teaching. And now that the progressed moon has moved into my 10th house, I'm in this massive period of change around work. And as I talked about last time, the progressed moon crossing the angles, ascendant, IC or nadir, descendant, midheaven, these are really significant turning points. And I'm in the process of creating a new website, a new business name, like trying to figure out, who am I? 10th house is the house of public identity, right? Who am I in the world? Crystal's with her progressed moon in the 4th house, she's trying to figure out, who am I, like, deepest inside myself? Who am I in my family? Who am I at home? Progressed moon in the opposite sign and opposite house, 10th house. Who am I in the world? And I'm totally reinventing. I'm in the process of figuring that out and reinventing that. So that's my little check-in here. And that's Elizabeth, you are unmuted. Hello.
Hey, so I'm just 4 months into a new sign. My progressed moon is now in Pisces.
Ah, how's it going?
Well, it is an act of surrender. I wrote down the book name.
Yeah, it's so good. I love it.
And my second house is in the second house. My second house is pretty wide. It's like 35 or 36 degrees wide. So I'm about midway through it, which makes sense. About a year ago-ish, I started on a new thing in my business, and it's been working pretty well. Moving into Pisces, the progressed moon into Pisces in probably early July. I didn't get the exact date on it. That was when I started thinking about doing more retreats and like spiritual retreats, of course. Mm-hmm. And the kind of dissolving into the collective consciousness. So that's been interesting. Also, so my progressed moon is at 4 degrees of Pisces. My natal Mercury is at 2 degrees of Pisces, directly opposite my natal Jupiter at 2 degrees of Virgo. And since Jupiter, as you pointed out, I was starting to look at Neptune, and you said, no, really look at the traditional dispositors. And so I'm a little stumped on like how to read that in a kind of tense angle to natally to the dispositor.
Yeah, well, I think, you have a natal theme around integrating Virgo Pisces. And while the progressed moon is in Pisces and its dispositor is Jupiter in Virgo, that theme is really accentuated. Yeah. Okay. And again, we would say, and I'm in the same boat with my Jupiter in Virgo, my progressed moon is about to go into Pisces, right? That this whole like surrender, go with the flow thing might be a little more challenging with Jupiter as the dispositor of the progressed moon in Pisces in Virgo.
Yes, we both have interesting Pisces Virgo conundrums, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and then just, thinking about, well, that's kind of an interesting combination, Pisces in the second house, right? Because the second house is very material. It's the house with a natural association with Taurus. So there's a sense of, resources, money, physical, material reality, and Pisces, dissolving, surrender. So it seems like, progressed moon being in Pisces in the second house, well, one theme could be about really getting in touch with spiritual values, since second house is the house of values at a deeper level. But also maybe calling for a more spiritual, surrendered approach to money and to manifestation, and just, what does that look like? So it might feel different from while the progressed moon was in Aquarius in the second house and what's been happening.
For sure.
Okay. Thank you for chiming in, Elizabeth.
Yeah. I mean, my business is spiritual, so it feels
perfect.
So, yeah. And my natal moon, like yours, is, well, it's in Taurus, but it's also the fourth house. So I think this fourth house, second house, back and forth feels pretty good, actually.
Right. And Pisces and Taurus have there's a natural sextile, an angle of cooperation between those two signs. So they're pretty, water and earth, they're pretty comfortable together.
My progressed moon is exactly sextile my natal moon at 40.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I just, Sunita had a question about aspects in the Facebook group, and I just want to address that very briefly. Because last time I went over aspects quite quickly. So, so this is a little more advanced. So if you are more at the, astro beginner level, you can really let this go for now. Because really the most important thing with the progressed moon would be the sign, the house, and then I think the progressed new moon cycle that we're going to talk about tonight. And if you're on top of like, all right, what sign is it in? What house is it in? What phase of this cycle am I in? You have a ton of information there, and that's plenty. So taking it to another level would be adding in aspects. And this is aspects from the progressed moon to natal planets. So progress to progress is just too weak and diffuse. So progress to natal. The main ones to pay attention to are the conjunctions. And squares and oppositions are also worth paying attention to. Don't bother with trines and sextiles. So the planets, looking at the planets as flavoring the mood of the moon. And if the progressed moon is making an aspect to a natal planet, it'll be in effect for a couple of months, for about 2 months. So start with when the progressed moon is 1 degree applying. In other words, 1 degree away from the planet, moving toward the planet. So that's when you'll start to feel it. We use very tight orbs with progressions. So in your interpretation, consider, what does the planet feel like? So is it Saturn? How does Saturn feel? Saturn tends to feel kind of heavy and can feel restricted, maybe even a little depressive. Oh, I feel under pressure. So for those few months, whatever sign and house the progressed moon is going through, it's going to be a period of like, oh, I'm in the squeeze, I'm under pressure, I really gotta, maybe have to work hard, get it right. Is it Neptune? Is the progressed moon aspecting Neptune? What's the mood? Kind of dreamy, maybe a little confused, maybe you need more naps, I'm not really sure what's going on, everything's a little bit hazy, my dream world is really fucking mind-blowing, right? But reality is a little weird, right? So it's like, what's the mood of the planet, and then bring that into your interpretation. Mars, I'm suddenly in touch with my anger, or I feel really fired up, or I need to assert myself. I want to assert myself. I'm really passionate about something. Suddenly I feel motivated. I have drive. Right. Okay. And again, like you can totally ignore the aspects if you're already overwhelmed with sign and house. Like again, just as I like to say, astrology is all about triage, right? So most important sign, house, and phase, which we'll talk about tonight. Okay. So I want to give a little. Sunita says, so if it's not 1 degree, I thought conjunction was, yeah. With progressions, we use a very tight orb. So really, I'd say we start with about 1 degree. Maybe you could, I mean, and this is something, experiment for yourself, you know? I mean, this is, with astrology, there's all different ideas. You know, if we talk about transits, some people will say you're in the Jeff Green School of Evolutionary Astrology will say that your Pluto transit lasts for like 6 years. The way I learned it, it lasts for 3 years. In shamanic astrology, they'll say it's 1.5 years, right? The great thing is we can feel it for ourselves. What feels true to you, right? So as you're tracking your progressed moon, notice, oh, it's getting close to my Pluto. Do I feel it yet? It's 8 degrees away. Not really. How about 6 degrees away? Not really, right? You track it, play with it. But the way I've learned and what I've noticed for myself, 1 degree applying. And then of course, when it's full on, you're gonna feel it. But so it's about a 2-month period altogether. What would the mood of Pluto feel like? Yes, it would feel deep and dark and underworldly. Okay. Intense, feel very intense, maybe obsessive. Sarah, do you have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay, go for it.
On the worksheet for last week, when you say my progressed moon is in whatever house, and then you say from blank to blank, wouldn't those dates be the same dates as the progressed moon is in whatever sign?
Well, if you're using whole sign houses, then yes. If you're using that house system, but mostly if you're using Placidus or equal houses or most of the house systems, then typically it's not. Typically, you can look at what degree that house starts at, and it's likely to not be 0 degrees of a sign.
Oh, okay.
And we can look, when we look at example charts later, we'll say hello to that. So you can see an example of that.
Okay. And can I just ask one other question?
Sure.
If my progressed moon is basically conjunct my natal sun, does that mean like I'm in like a new moon phase?
No, it does not. I would go back to the interpretation of what I was just talking about with aspects, because the lunar phases, which we're going to talk about tonight, are progressed moon to progressed sun. So when the progressed moon is conjunct your natal sun, it's still significant, but it's not connected to the phases. So it's more like, oh, I really feel more like myself, or I feel more sun, I feel more solar, I feel more lit up, I feel we're happy. And of course it's all going to depend on, well, what's your natal sun all about? What's your natal sun by sign and house, and that's what you're really feeling into.
Yeah.
Feeling like more of yourself and feeling more lit up with that solar energy. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Okay. So we're going to shift into a little Astro.com tutorial. So I'm going to share a screen for Astro.com. Okay. Is everyone seeing Astro.com homepage? Can I get a little thumb action? Yes or not? Okay. Okay, so here's the homepage. I'm going to walk you through how to get your progress chart from Astro.com, since I know that's where a lot of you go for your charts. So first, in the menu bar, you want to scroll over free horoscopes. And then choose, under Drawings and Calculations, choose Extended Chart Selection. Okay. And then we're going to find what we're looking for under Chart Type. So this is assuming you've already got, you have an account on astro.com, you've got your birth info in there, maybe a bunch of other people's info. So you pull up, here's horoscope for Emily, chart type, we click on the drop-down menu. And there's all kinds of options here. So we scroll down until we get to progressions. And then the one we want is the natal and progress chart. And this is because, as I was talking about last time, when we look at a progress chart, it's always in relation to the natal chart. So we click on natal and progress chart. And then click here to show the chart. Okay, so this is what you end up with, and this is similar to the buy wheel that I sent you, but of course it looks quite different because instead of giving you the whole image of the progress chart on the outside, it just puts the progress planets in green around the outside. And so, here's my progress moon. There's a little green line at 29.5 degrees of Aquarius, but this makes it a little tricky to look at degrees the way the image is. But if you scroll down, it gives you all the natal degrees and the progress degrees. So here I'd say, okay, my moon is at 29 degrees Aquarius and 22 minutes. Okay. So this is just the basic progressed chart. And now I'm going to go back, and I want to show you how to get your progressed new moon chart. So this will basically be the chart of your most recent progressed new moon. And of course, later I'm going to explain what that is and why we care. So we go back to chart type, and we're under progressions. And what we want is the natal chart and progressed new moon. Natal and progressed new moon. And again, this is because we're going to see the progressed new moon in relation to the natal chart, which we always want with progressions. And then click here to show the chart. Okay. So this was and it gives you the date. So this is 14th of June 2009 is when my progressed new moon happened. My most recent one happened. And the cycle goes until November 18th, 2038. Okay, that's right, this 29-year cycle. And we see at the progressed new moon, or at any new moon, the sun and moon are together. So we'll look for where that sun-moon conjunction is. And again, the degrees are here. So in case it's not obvious from the tiny little lines that mark the degrees, we can just look here and say, okay, the sun and the moon are together at, oops, I don't know what I just did. Oops, okay. Anyway, sun and moon are together at 28 degrees of Libra. And we see that that's in my 5th house. So this is the information we're looking for our homework this week, which will be to find your new moon chart, find out when it happened, and then there's a worksheet with some questions about that. But for me, I'd say, okay, my new moon happened in June of 2009 at 28 degrees of Libra in my 5th house. Okay. I'm going to see if there's any questions about that process. Is that clear? Do you feel confident that you can find your progress chart and your progress new moon chart? Good. Okay, awesome. Okay, then we shall move on. So I'm going to bring up the handout that I created, and Elizabeth says, and then we simply calculate from those data. Calculate what? Calculate, let me unmute you, Elizabeth. Oh,
Yeah, just
oh,
moon phase.
phase. Yeah, I will talk about that. I'll talk about that when we talk about the cycle. You could do it that way, but there's other ways, which I'll talk about. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the handout on the progressive lunar cycle. You're welcome, Elizabeth. Okay. Is everyone seeing a handout on the progressive lunar return and progressive new moon cycles? Yes? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's two different cycles we're going to talk about. And the first one we're going to talk about more briefly because it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to go over it fairly quickly. We're going to spend a lot more time on the second one. The second one is the progressed new moon cycle, but it's important to know about the progressed lunar return cycle. So we're going to say hello to that one as well. So the progressed lunar return cycle is the cycle of the progressed moon to the natal moon. And this is a cycle that everyone goes through at about the same age, which is different from the progressed new moon cycle, which happens at all kinds of ages, any age. So because the progressed moon takes about 27 to 28 years to move through your whole chart, around age 27, you get your first lunar return. And then the second one happens around age 54, and the third one, if you're lucky enough to be here that long, around 81. And the lunar return is the most important point in this cycle, but we're going to talk about the other parts of it. This is a time when everything moon related comes into focus, and the sense of having completed, think about it in terms of you get your lunar return after the progressed moon has moved through your entire chart. It's moved through all the signs, it's moved through all the houses. So there's a sense of having gone through a lot of experiences emotionally and experienced your full chart. You felt the whole thing. So at the return, it's this sense of having grown emotionally. And there's typically big themes going on around home, around mother and mothering, how we mother ourselves, how we mother others, and a kind of sense of like taking stock of our lives. I've had a few very literal examples, but one of them was I had a client who was in her second lunar return, so she was around 54, and she was in the process of selling the family home. Like, she had been divorced for years, the kids were grown up, they had moved out, and she had lived in the same house for like 30 years, and that's where she raised her family. And she's like, I'm done. I don't need all this space. And her kids were really upset with her because they didn't want her to sell the house because they were all nostalgic about, the house they grew up in. And she's like, I'm just done. Right. So this can be, there can be big changes in your home at the lunar return. And we want to notice that this cycle is very similar to the Saturn cycle, the transiting Saturn cycle, because Saturn takes about 29 years to go all the way around your chart, to travel all the way around the sun, to go all the way around your chart. So the progressed moon moves a little bit faster than transiting Saturn. It's a little bit ahead. So at the first lunar return, happens right around age 27, 28. So the first lunar return is just before the first Saturn return, but they're kind of hard to distinguish from each other because we're in both of them pretty in close proximity. So it can feel just like one big blah. But the second lunar return happens around age 54. So that's about 4 years before the second Saturn return. And I like this idea, you know, since the progressed moon is so much about our evolving emotional reality, and the Saturn cycle is a lot about our physical reality, like what we're creating in the world and how we respond to external events. So by the time of the second lunar return, it's like there's more separation between where we're at emotionally and what's happening out there. Whereas when we're still, you know, we're in our late 20s, time of our first lunar return, first Saturn return, we tend to be a lot more reactive and take things more personally and very emotionally caught up in whatever's happening in our external reality. There's more distance and more neutrality, ideally, in an ideal world, less reactivity around the time of the second lunar return and second Saturn return. Okay, and in this sense, the way that with the lunar return happening before the Saturn return, there's also a sense of this is our inner preparation for the challenges that we're likely to face during a Saturn return. So doing the inner work, doing the emotional work to be able to handle what's coming at us, or what seems to be coming at us during the Saturn return. Okay. So the return, again, being the headline of this cycle, but we can also look at the quarters. So the squares and the opposition of this cycle. So the opening square, so the first square, so in other words, when the moon is 90 degrees ahead of, the progressed moon is 90 degrees ahead of the natal moon, there's a sense of leaving home. And again, age 7, this is huge developmentally. This is also the first square from transiting Saturn to natal Saturn. Age 7 is a huge deal. Noticing at age 34, that's when we tend to come into, depending on what generation you're in, but that's often Pluto square Pluto, a big sort of midlife crisis transit. So the opening square is associated with leaving home, a separation from what's familiar. I mean, thinking about this, you know, again, we're in the last class, we were talking about how much affinity does your natal moon have with your progressed moon? And at the square, this is, the progressed moon is squaring the natal moon. So it's going to be out of your comfort zone. It's going to be challenging. And the energy of that first square is a sense of, okay, I'm entering a new world and I don't have my security blanket with me. I gotta stretch myself. Crisis in action is a sort of catchphrase for the opening square as well. The opposition comes in at age 14. Doesn't the word opposition just seem appropriate for age 14? Age 14, obviously huge developmentally. 41, noticing that 41, this coincides with the Uranus opposition, the classic midlife crisis transit. And the Uranus opposition is a lot about doing the opposite of what you're used to doing. And when your progressed moon is opposite your natal moon, the nourishment is coming from the opposite place from where it's the most familiar, where it's the most comfortable. And we can think of, you know, a 14-year-old who's like venturing out into the world. That's such a big phase of shifting priorities, turning to social life instead of family, right? The sense of like, oh, I'm not from there. You know, the moon having so much to do with our origins, our family, our roots. The opposition is like, I'm not even related to those people. I don't fit in with them at all. I'm gonna go hang out with my friend. So, and age 41, again, coinciding with the Uranus opposition, this tends to be a time where we're really like shaking things up and doing the opposite of our norm and experimenting and just going in a radically new direction or unfamiliar direction. Closing square. So this is the progressed moon, again, squaring the natal moon, but it's from the other side. And this is really like, again, there could be the sense of crisis or challenge of being in unfamiliar territory in the square, but you're also setting yourself up for the completion of the cycle. So this sense of, okay, I'm going to be coming home, I'm going to be returning back to home base in another 6-7 years. How do I want to finish this cycle? And then the lunar return, back home. This was something I heard Darby Costello talk about. I listened to a great class that she did on the progressed moon, and she was talking about this cycle. And she was talking about how you can really pay attention to which modality your natal moon is in, because all of these aspects will happen in that same modality. So if your natal moon is in a cardinal sign, and the cardinal signs are the initiators and the go-getters and make it happen, then every step of this phase is going to be a lot about, I have to do something, like this sense of like urgency around taking action, because that's how cardinal moons tend to respond. If your natal moon is in a fixed sign, and just let me back up, cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. Those are the 4 cardinal signs. If your moon's in a fixed sign, and the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, if your moon's in a fixed sign and you come into the square, the opposition, then there's a sense of really needing to sit with something. The fixed signs are not like, I gotta immediately do something. It's like, fixed signs really need to sit with things. We can do change, but we just need time to do a lot of inner process about it. The moon in a mutable sign, and the mutable signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Moon in a mutable sign will tend to go through a lot of backy-forthy, a lot of vacillation, a lot of is it this or is it that? Because we know how those mutable signs are. Can be very, shifty, and not shifty in a bad way. I mean, shifting quickly. So it can be a lot of like, oh, this, that, oh no. So notice, and and I encourage you to look at what was your most recent activation of this cycle. Are you closest to an opening square, an opposition, a closing square, or the lunar return? And just to look back at what happened, and if you want to do more in-depth personal research to really track it, okay, what was happening at 7, 14, 21, 27, etc. Okay, I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions about this cycle, this progressed lunar cycle. Any questions? Is that pretty clear? Makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Okay. 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 So we're going to shift to talking about the progressed new moon cycle. And again, this is the cycle of the progressed moon to the progressed sun. And actually, let me just pause a moment. Even though this is a progressed moon class, I do want to say just a few words about the progressed sun, because that's a really big deal. And the progressed sun moves 1 degree a year. And so it will change signs every 30 years. And the first time it changes signs depends on where your sun was when you were born. So in other words, if you were born with your sun at 29 degrees of Libra, then your progressed sun is going to move into Scorpio when you're 1 year old. Right? If you're born with your progressed sun at, or if you're born with your sun at 15 degrees of Libra, it's going to move into Scorpio when you're about 15 years old. Okay, so and you know, 1 degree a year, you can ballpark it. So the progressed sun changing signs is a really big deal, and that is something to pay attention to. And I would encourage you to look at where your progressed sun is now and just count back. You know, if your progressed sun is at 7 degrees of a sign, just count back 7 years, and that'll give you the approximate time that the sun shifted into that sign. And there's typically like a full year of adjustment to the progressed sun changing signs. So play with that, look at that. But like I said, worth paying attention to, and worth a little detour, even though our priority here is the moon. Okay. So the relationship between the progressed moon and progressed sun is what we're looking at. And a familiarity with the actual lunar cycle, like the lunar cycle in real time, will serve you very well in looking at this progressed new moon cycle. Because if you already, and I know a lot of you are in the lunar creation circle and have done, you know, many new moon calls and full moon calls with me, and have, I'm sure, studied on your own and worked with this cycle on your own, great, because it's the same. It's just 29 years instead of 29 days. But same premise. If you have a sense of what the new moon is and what a full moon is, and what the first quarter is, even better, and what the last quarter is, and you know, if you're familiar with the lunar cycle, this will serve you very well. And if you're not familiar with the lunar cycle, start paying attention, because that will help you get a sense for what these different phases are like in the progressed lunar cycle, what they feel like. So, so this is, yes, a 29.5 year cycle. So a cycle that's almost 30 years. And as I mentioned before, it's completely individual, unlike the lunar return cycle, where we know everyone's going to go through these certain phases at certain ages. This cycle depends on which lunar phase you were born in. So, so if you were born at a new moon, then you'll have your next progressed new moon around age 29 or 30. But most of us were not born at a new moon, so it's just kind of all over the place. The progressed new moon is huge, huge. I love working with it. It's so obvious. The other phases are obvious as well, but the progressed new moon is really big. This is a huge rebirth, and it's also, so there's a feeling of rebirth at the progressed new moon, of rebirth, renewal, optimism. Ah, the light is returning, yes. And it's this seed planting for a whole new life direction that's going to unfold over the next 29 years. So very big deal. And we want to pay attention. We're going to look at some examples of this. We want to pay attention to the sign that the progressed new moon is happening in, of course, and also the house, and again, natal houses. And these are going to show you what is this whole cycle about, right? Just as in real time, when we talk about the new moon as like a blueprint for the entire 29-day cycle, right? The themes are whatever is happening at the new moon is in effect for that whole month. Same thing with the progressed new moon, except this is in effect for the next 30 years. It's a big deal. So you look at the sign, you look at the house, you notice, again, we're going to look at some examples. You'll notice if the progressed new moon is conjunct any of your natal planets, and then you could bring those planets into your interpretation. And it's also worth looking to see if that progressed new moon also happen to be a solar eclipse. And when we look at the full moon, the progressed full moon, you can look at whether that was a lunar eclipse. In order to find that out, there are all kinds of websites that have, you know, lists of eclipse dates, so you could Google that up. If you have an ephemeris, which every serious student of astrology should have, then you can simply look it up. And what you're looking for is, you're not looking for 2017. If your progressed new moon is happening in 2017, you're not looking there. For example, if I want to find out if my most recent progressed new moon was an eclipse, I'm going to go back to 1968, the year I was born. And look for, okay, when was the Libra new moon? Libra new moon happened in October of 68, and then I can, oh my God, oh, I think it was a solar eclipse. Who knew? I had to look that up before. Oh no, it wasn't. The previous new moon was a solar eclipse, but this one wasn't. Okay, so you can look in the ephemeris if you want to be a super astro geek, and otherwise look online. But again, you're looking for the year you were born, and you know the sign. So I'd be looking for the Libra new moon in October of 1968. Was that a solar eclipse? Okay, I hope that's clear. We can go over that again if you need to. Okay, and if it's a solar eclipse, it's a bigger deal. It's more powerful. So just as with the regular good old lunar cycle, there are 8 phases. We also look at 8 phases of the progressed new moon cycle. In real time, each phase lasts about 2.5 days. In progressed time, each phase lasts about 2.5 years. And here I go through each of the phases, each of the 8 phases. And I gave you, when you're looking at different computer programs, they might just give you symbols of the aspect, and that's why I gave you the symbols of the aspect, so you would know what is what. I think there's a chat. Where'd it go? Chat. Okay, Jen is asking, what if your new moon is in 2 signs? Okay, that's impossible. So the new moon cannot be in 2 signs. The new moon is when the sun and the moon are conjunct, are at the same degree of the zodiac. So the new moon can only be in 1 sign. Okay, Elizabeth, when we looked at my progressed new moon chart on astro.com, we saw that it was at 28 degrees of Libra, right? So it was the Libra new moon. Remembering that with progressions, it's 1 day equals a year. So I was born in September of 1968. So my progressed chart is, I don't think, you know, with a day for a year, so each month is like 30 years, I'm probably not going to get, well, maybe, I'm probably not going to get out of 1968, for looking at progressions, right? Okay, I'll come back to your question, Jen, in a second. So I know it's a Libra new moon, so it's a 28-degree Libra new moon. So the sun was at 28 degrees of Libra, therefore I know that happens in October. I was born in September. By progressions, I've only made it to October, right? And so that's how I knew it was October of 1968. It's Libra, so it's late Libra. It's going to be October. Okay, I hope that helps. Jen, what if the progressed new moon says in 2.5 years? Oh yeah, well, okay. your progressed new moon is not changing signs. Your progressed moon is changing signs. So the progressed moon will keep moving. It's going to change signs every 2.5 years, but the progressed new moon only happens once every 29.5 years. So your progressed new moon is what it is. It's just like, we have the Scorpio new moon coming up on, I think it's Saturday. After the Scorpio new moon, the moon's going to move on into Sag, and then it's going to be in Capricorn, and then it's going to continue moving around the wheel. But the new moon is still the Scorpio new moon for the entire month. We're working with the Scorpio new moon. Does that help, Jen? Does that make sense?
Earlier in the year I was looking at this, and I just saw that it was in Aries for during the 2.5 years. It was in Aries for half the time, and then it went to Taurus for half the time of that phase. So, but if I'm hearing you right, then Aries, because it began in Aries, then that's its sign.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were just okay. Good. Oh, I see. Okay. Good. So because each phase, I think this is where the confusion comes in. Because each phase lasts for 2.5 years, you're in the new moon phase. Mm-hmm. Even though your progressed moon might have changed signs during that phase.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the same for me, right? Because the progressed new moon was at 28 degrees of Libra. Well, 4 months later, my progressed moon moved into Scorpio, but I'm still in the progressed new moon phase, but my progressed new moon itself is always Libra. Because the progressed new moon is just that one moment.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
That's good. Now I totally see where you're coming from. Good clarifying question. Okay. Oops. Okay, any other questions so far? Is this clear-ish? Clear-ish. Okay, so we could, basically, I think in the interest of time, and we will go a little bit longer than expected since we started a little bit late, but I don't want to go too far over. So since in the handout, it does give you a little bit about each lunar phase, I think hopefully enough to work with. And then when we do more example charts next week, then we'll play with that some more, but hopefully that gives you enough sort of starting point. And there's a book I really want to recommend. It's by Stephen Forrest. It's called The Book of the Moon. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Stephen Forrest. He's written several books. He's a Capricorn, and he's just really good at like organizing the material. I remember The Inner Sky. I'd actually bought The Inner Sky when I was like 19, and then I couldn't read it. I just couldn't, it somehow just didn't make any sense to me. And then I picked it up off my shelf just as I was coming into my Saturn return, and it was like, oh, that's how you, okay. And it was just like such a great step-by-step, how do you read a chart, right? The Inner Sky, for those of you who don't know it, great Astro 101 book. But this book, which is, I think it's his most recent, The Book of the Moon, this is all about lunar phases. So the majority of the book is about the significance of which lunar phase you were born in. So what does it mean to be born at a new moon or at the first quarter or as a waning gibbous or a waxing crescent? And then he also has a section all about the progressed lunar cycles. So he gives, great examples and blah, blah, blah with the progressed moon going through these different phases. So I highly, highly recommend that. It's very, very useful. And it is very useful to understand which phase you were born in, just in general, but also as we're working with the progressed phases, because again, similar to natal moon sign versus progressed moon sign, how comfortable do I feel there? How am I going to navigate this? We can also look at, well, what phase were you born in? And then what phase are you in now? And how do those relate to each other? So very, very useful. And like I said, also, you can learn a lot about the progressed lunar phases by paying attention to the real-time lunar phases. Because you're like, oh, how am I feeling for these 2.5 days? Oh, that's how I'm going to feel for 2.5 years when my moon's in that phase. Right? Okay, so I want to look at a couple of charts to talk about the progressed new moon and also like a little before and a little after. This chart is going to start with. Yes. Okay, and I want to start with Olivia's chart. Go away. Okay, is everyone seeing a chart with the name Olivia on it? Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this is Olivia's chart. And as always, we have the progressed planets on the outside. This is her natal chart on the inside. So anytime, if you're looking at a progressed chart and you see that the sun and moon are close to each other, then you know that this person is either about to have a new moon. If they're right on top of each other, they are having their new moon, or they just had their new moon, right? If the sun and moon are somewhere in close proximity, we know they're right around the new moon. But it's really important to know, did it already happen or has it not happened yet? I love it when clients come to me when they're in the balsamic phase, and that's where Olivia is. She's at the very end of the lunar cycle. How do we know that this is the end of the lunar cycle and not the beginning? The sun is at 20 degrees of Gemini. The moon is at 11 degrees of Gemini. The moon moves, as we know, a lot faster than the sun. The moon moves a degree a month. The sun moves a degree a year. So if the moon is earlier than the sun, then she hasn't had her new moon yet. She's had a new moon, but she's in the extreme waning phase. So this is the waning crescent or balsamic phase. And the reason why I love it when clients come to me when they're in this phase is because they're typically like, what the fuck? What is going on? Why is nothing happening? Why is everything falling apart? How come I'm like doing what I would normally do to make something happen and it's just not working? Why am I in the dark? Okay. Now, something just to consider, like one way that you can look at this whole progressed moon phase thing is how much light is there? How much light is there? Because anytime that the sun and moon are fairly close together, there's not much light, right? The new moon is the dark of the moon. The extreme balsamic phase, the end of the cycle, dark of the moon. Even the beginning of the new moon phase, dark of the moon, okay? So we know that in real time, it's usually, depends on your view of the sky, but usually it's like 2 days after the new moon that we start to see that little crescent moon comes back, that lovely slender crescent returns. But there's a couple of days of darkness. So in progressed time, we've got like a good 4 years of darkness. 2 years before the new moon, 2 years after the new moon. Okay? And it's so helpful. It's so helpful to know that this is what's going on and you're not doing anything wrong if things aren't coming together and if you're not able to. I had a client, a guy, he was probably in his 40s at the time he came to me. Balsamic moon phase, right? And he had lost his job. He had gone through a divorce. He was also in a Pluto transit, so it was like double theme of everything falling apart. And he's like, he could not get another job. And he's like, when am I going to get another job? I'm not a predictive astrologer, but I did say like, hey, this is a time to let it all go, time to surrender. It might not come together. It might not be ready to come together until that new moon happens. Okay. And again, we can ballpark it here. Of course, we can do the full on looking it up too, but if Olivia came to you and was like, we could say, okay, it's going to be in about 9 months, right? Because we just count moon to sun, it's 9 degrees away. So in about 9 months. And actually, I looked it up. It's her next new moon is June 22nd, 2018. And it will be at 20 degrees of Gemini, which is kind of cool because here's an example of a new moon that's going to happen conjunct natal planets. Okay, so actually, let me back up. First thing we want to look at is sign and house of new moon. So Gemini new moon, starting a new cycle of connecting and communicating, and maybe a lot of things changing. There's that strong mutable energy, learning, teaching, right? All these Gemini themes, and then it's in the 12th house, learning and teaching about what? Communicating with what? Wow, with consciousness itself. This is like a deep spiritual new moon here happening in the 12th house. So a new beginning that's a lot about connecting more deeply with her spiritual life, with the unconscious, maybe writing something channeled, or who knows how it's going to manifest. But, so you can start thinking of some ideas, and sometimes this is very literal. So I had a client who had just had her progressed new moon. It was in Aquarius in the 4th house. And so I started to talk about some Aquarius 4th house themes. I mean, community, Aquarius, home, 4th house. Well, it turned out, she had just had it less than a year before. It turned out the same month of her progressed new moon, she and a friend had signed a lease for this land where they wanted to develop a community, like, sort of spiritual community, with a bunch of different friends living there, and space for community events and blah, blah, blah. Very literal. So as always, like, talking to the client is actually going to give you more. Yeah, Sunita, we're going to look at your chart. You just sit tight, honey. You just sit tight. Okay, so the progressed new moon happens when the sun and moon come together by side. Okay, and then we would bring in, okay, this is activating her natal Venus-Mars conjunction. So this is also a new beginning, new moon, when it comes to both her masculine and her feminine, and her integration of masculine and feminine. And I would imagine someone with Venus, Mars conjunct in Gemini, this might be someone who really plays with, Gemini has kind of an androgynous flavor, or a like gender bending, or could be this, could be that, sort of crossing those typical or more conventional setups. Yeah, all super cool. Good, Elizabeth, thank you. Oops, I'm going to stand there. Okay, so we'd want to talk to her about her inner masculine or inner feminine, and maybe maybe she's going to like learn something or write something or teach something having to do with the masculine feminine integration and balance and expression. Who knows? Okay, so is everyone following me here? I'm going to just pause to see if there's any questions. Is that making sense with me? Okay, cool. Elizabeth has a question. What's your question?
So apparently my next new moon is August 3rd of 2020, coming up soon. How do I need to look at an ephemeris to see the sign and degree number?
No, you just look on that astro.com chart.
So that's telling me the next one or the past one? I thought that was showing me 1990.
Oh, you're right. It might show you your past one. I think you might be able to set it to show you the next one. But yeah, you could look in the ephemeris and just get the degree, and then you'll know which house it's in. You'll know which sign and which house it's in.
Okay. Yeah, just look up August 3rd, 2020 and see whatever you guys have.
No. we're not, we never, with progressions, that this is not transits, this is progressions. So you were born in 68 as well. You're never going to get out of 68 unless you transcend the limits of time and space and live to be, you know, a couple hundred years, right?
Years old, yes.
Right. So you're going to look back. You can look at the ephemeris to find out, or there, I think there might be a way to do it on astro.com. There's certainly a way to do it in Solar Fire, the astrology software I use, and in other softwares, and it'll be different depending on which software you're using. You might be able to, on astro.com, you can probably specify that you want it, you know, change the date to specify that you want it to be the next one. So play around with that.
Okay. But if I look in the ephemeris, I look back in 1968 for the previous progression, or where I am today, or
start with your birthday and count forward.
Okay.
So in 2020, how old will you be? Count that many days after your birth. Remember, day per year. So
I'll be 52.
You'll be, my math is terrible, but if you'll be like 50, 51, then it'll be around 51 days after your birth, and you can see which new moon is happening then.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oops. No, now I want to share. Okay. Okay, so let's look at Sunita's chart, because it's so exciting. Sunita's progressed new moon is today. Happy progressed new moon, Sunita. How is that for synchronicity that she happens to be taking this class as she has her progressed freaking new moon? So first of all, if we look at Sunita's progressed chart, we see, oh, the sun and the moon are both at 19 degrees of Libra. And so then I looked at my, yeah, congrats, Sunita. Then I looked at my Solar Fire to find out when is her exact progressed new moon, and saw that it is today. And it's at 19 Libra. So, you know, one thing I also like to look up, like let's say Sunita's my client coming to me, or even with Olivia, you know, being at the very end of a cycle, or Sunita at a brand new cycle, I always like to look up when was the previous new moon for the closing cycle. And Sunita's fairly young, being born in 77. So she was quite young with her previous new moon, the new moon that just ended, new moon cycle that just ended. So that previous cycle for Sunita started in May of 1988. And it was a Virgo cycle. 20 degrees of Virgo was where the last progressed new moon happens. And this is what happens, right? This progressed new moon is in Libra. The previous one is in Virgo, right? That's how it works. It's always going to be that way. So we could talk about, well, okay, that last cycle was a Virgo cycle. Oh, it was a Virgo 10th house cycle, and how different that might be from a Libra, and this is actually in her 11th house. And this is, I know it looks a little bit wonky here, but there wasn't enough room for the program to fit in all the 11th house planets, so they did a little extendo line. But we see that her 11th house ends at 22 degrees of Libra, and the new moon's at 19 degrees of Libra. So here we're putting together Libra themes. I mean, so just, you know, we can feel this, right? So a Virgo 10th house cycle, that seems pretty serious and hardworking and very much focused on skill building and service and healing, right? And 11th house Libra, the 11th house is the house naturally associated with Aquarius, another air sign. So the 11th house is a pretty social arena, right? House of community and friends and giving our gifts to the world. And there's a sense of harvest, things coming together. Libra, sign of relationship, beauty, art, aesthetics. feels a lot lighter than the closing cycle. Feels lighter, more playful. And also noticing that it's not that far from her north node. And I would say even if her north node were like at 1 degree of Libra and nowhere near this new moon, I would still think that's useful to talk about, because the north node has to do with your soul's evolutionary path. And isn't it helpful to have a new moon, a progressed new moon, in the same sign as the north node? Because that's really, this is a cycle that's so much about moving, stepping more and more into her life's path and life's purpose of being a team player and a support person. And this is a cycle where she's going to learn a lot about doing that and do it more and more. I also like to tell people who are at the new moon phase that wow, the past couple of years were probably pretty challenging, right? And to kind of inquire into how that balsamic phase has been. And, you know, and yeah, and so he says, yay, I felt strongly I needed to be live today. Now I know why. Yes, very challenging, right? So when the cycle's coming to an end and things are falling apart and we feel kind of lost, and so it's a very happy thing when we get that new moon phase and there's that renewal and yes, the light returns. But again, this is why I love talking to people when they're in the balsamic phase, to let them know that the light is returning. Keep the faith, it's coming back. Okay, so there's a few ideas there. And noticing the time, and I'm going to check in to see if there's any questions, and then we'll close for the night. And in our next class, which will be our last class, we'll do a lot more example charts, and also I'll answer any questions that have come up as you've been working with these cycles on your own and reflecting on them after tonight. But yeah, so Sam is saying you mentioned 2 years before and the 2 years after being dark. Sunita, it's your north node. The planets are affected. That would be your north node, being, as I mentioned, being close to the new moon. Yeah, it is. Okay, good question, Sam. So you're still in the dark. The new moon has happened, but you're still in the dark. And yet, so to be in the darkness, as we know, the darkness is a time of visioning. It's a time of deep, inner focus. But you can feel the shift from the balsamic to the new moon phase, because even though you're in the dark, it's like your sense of your vision, your hope, your optimism have been renewed. You still might not be clear, and in fact, you probably won't be clear about like what I'm going to do for the next 29 years. Oh, now I know what it's all going to look like. You are still in the dark, but there's a sense of building now. So it's like this turning of the tides instead of it's like So I'm still in the dark, but it feels easier to be there. Makes sense. And again, since we do have a new moon coming up on Saturday, Scorpio new moon, this is a good time to really just pay attention to how you're feeling approaching that new moon as we're in the balsamic phase. How does that feel? What do I want to do? What's my mood like? And then notice how you feel at the new moon, just after the new moon, those couple days, right? And just because that's like a little capsule of the progressed moon experience during those phases. Sarah, you have a question? You're unmuted.
No.
No? Okay. Your iPad raised your hand. So Sanu's saying Pluto and Mercury do nothing there. Yeah, they're not actually close enough to be included in the new moon interpretation, Sunita. But I would say the North Node is. And not that, yeah, they're in the same house and sign, so it could be worth saying hello to, but really, in terms of what's really engaging with the new moon, that would be the North Node. Any other final thoughts, questions? Marty, you're unmuted. Oops, you're not unmuted. Why can't I unmute you? I can't unmute you, Marty. Can you unmute yourself?
I think yeah, I muted myself, sorry. So does that mean the full moon, it would be the opposite? Like very exciting and everything that you were been feeling, just like, is that a different class or?
So on the handout, I give a
Okay.
little blurb
The
about
new
each phase.
moon is the most important to
Yeah,
you?
everything else in the cycle is going to refer back to the new moon.
Like the seed. So you're like,
so the
talk
full
about
moon
planning.
phase is just like real time full moon. The fruition, the culmination, the manifestation. And a very opposite energy. When you're in the dark phase, it's like not much happening, not really seeing any results here. I got to hold the vision. Full moon phase is like, it's all happening. It feels like too much happening. There's so much going on. But the full moon is going to refer back to, right? So if I'm working with a client who's in their full moon phase, yeah, we're going to look at the sign in the house that the full moon is happening in. But we're also going to look back to, hey, so 14 years ago, you had this new moon. There was a seed planting. These are the themes that were activated at that new moon, and this is the culmination. This is how it's coming to fruition now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, totally.
And you can do that with each phase of the cycle. It's all going to refer back to that new moon, including the balsamic phase, right? Like including if someone's in the very end of the cycle, you could be like, hey, you're closing out the cycle that started at this time. It was with these themes. These are the themes you've been working with really strongly for this cycle. I mean, I remember recently working with a client who was closing out a progressed new moon cycle in Pisces, and I think the new moon had been conjunct her natal Chiron or something. And it was like, whoa, the cycle that's closing out, which is so much about healing and really deep and the unconscious, and she was coming up on a new moon in Aries, like totally different energy, right? But it's good to know, like, okay, what are you dealing with as you're closing out this cycle? You're completing, these are the themes, the core themes that you've been working with for 20 something years, right? Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, the degrees are on there. Yeah, waning crescent is same as balsamic. And those are all on the handout, what the degrees are. So the homework suggestion is to find out your progressed new moon, when that happened, sign and house it was in, right? Look on astro.com, your most recent progressed new moon, and reflect on that, fill out the little worksheet there. And then what phase are you in now? And what are you noticing? And how does that relate back to your progressed new moon and where it happened? Right? So if you're in the full moon phase, oh, here's what's coming to culmination. If you're in the last quarter phase, oh, here's my push to complete what I started, 21 years ago. And, okay, good. All right. Okay. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm gonna unmute everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank
you. Good night, everyone. See you next week. Thank you for being here.